Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another Lawyer Forward Live. I'm Mike Whalen. I'm here with Josh Kubicki. Josh, I want to tell the people at home with law professor Josh Kubicki, or with clinic director Josh Kubicki, or with business owner Josh Kubicki, or with master gardener Josh Kubicki. I don't know what to tell people is your title. So first, you get to tell people your title.
Man, that's a loaded question. I don't know. I'm going to sound really lame because I've been struggling with this. I've been A/B testing my Twitter profile, and I did actually A/B test it. So I'll go with what the A/B test told me. So the legal modernist and the legal profession's business designer. That sounds like word salad and much of nothing, but I'm going to go with that for right now. And that's the name of my podcast too, Legal Modernist. So
Oh,
we'll just
nice.
own.
I want to make sure that we are live in the Facebook thingy. So give me 1 second to check the technology. But I think that we're going. For those of you who are watching on the Facebook thingy, you are able to ask questions of Josh while we are here. If you are watching this into the future or listening on a podcast, do not try to ask Josh questions on your podcast app. That's dumb and that's not how technology works. Josh, I think to your point, there is an interesting conversation that we're not going to have about portfolio careers and like the difficulty of the kind of advice that I give to lawyers a lot about building a portfolio career and having a bunch of different things going on at once, and particularly around systems in a way. Like, I don't like the rich dad, poor dad kind of method of just having 8 businesses, but I like the idea of having a bunch of contributing, parts of who you are. But that makes it really difficult for you to pass what I call the guy test. Nobody knows you as the blank guy because you're doing all the things. So, and actually, I think that relates to what we're talking about today, because we're talking about buying and selling law firms, and why you would do it. What is it? What is additive about buying that firm? If you are considering selling your firm, what are you adding to someone else, right? How do you think about taking that piece of your portfolio and handing it off to somebody else to enhance their portfolio? Or how do you bring in somebody else's piece of their portfolio into your own in a way that is not emotional? It's not your identity. You're not selling off who you are. You're selling off a piece of your portfolio, or buying a piece to enhance the bigger system. So I think it's really interesting. We'll dig into that. Before we do, are you in Cincinnati?
I am as we speak.
So I went to high school in Cincinnati, Turpin High School. I
That's the
went
school district I'm in.
Yeah, I went and visited recently. Do you know Mark Homer from Get Notice, Get Found? Do you know him?
Yes, I know of. I don't think we
Okay, I'm
might
going
have
to
met.
connect you guys. I'm going to
Yeah.
tag him in this thing so that he shows up. He is a barely likable person. I put up with it. It's mostly an act of charity that I try to raise him to the level of being a likable person. But I will connect you, and if you will add to the kindness, and also try to bring Mark into the modern world where we are kind to each other. Mark is just He's one of the sweetest people I've ever met. He's very Midwestern, He's just got that
Of
vibe.
course,
We went to
absolutely.
a FC Cincinnati game together,
Hmm.
watched some soccer. I didn't understand it, but I got hot dogs, and that's what matters.
And the brand new stadium, which I hear
And
is
it was
glorious. I haven't
beautiful.
been there.
Yeah, no, it was
Yeah.
a crazy experience. All right, so you're in Cincinnati, but you teach at Richmond, which is in, as people might know, Richmond, Virginia. So speaking of portfolio careers, what the hell is wrong with you? So are you driving from Cincinnati to Richmond to teach at Richmond?
Yeah. So yes, and I began my teaching in law school at Michigan State University, and I still lived in Cincinnati, and that was a 4.5 hour commute. And I simply thought, well, that doesn't show dedication or commitment enough. I must be able to find a longer commute, and
Sure.
and I found one. It's 7.5 hours drive to Richmond.
Nice. And you
To
do that once a week? Once every other week?
I was doing it once a week. I've now doing it once every other week.
Awesome. So, your role at Richmond, you and I talked about this a little bit before, and I'm gonna frame this conversation for the folks at home. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about if you're going to buy or sell a firm. What are sort of the core? I'm going to riff off of a book called Built to Sell by John Warillo, and his advice on what you need to do to get a firm ready to sell, and on the flip side, if you're going to buy a firm, what you should look for in a firm, the things that they should have present. And then we're going to talk about the reality that most of that crap is just not true with law firms and what to do about it. Where's the opportunity there and where's the risk? So you teach at Richmond. What is your official title there? You're a director of the Center of Wizzy and the
I'm
Wuzzy?
an assistant professor of legal practice
Nice.
and director of the Legal Business Design Hub. It was originally called the Legal Innovation and Entrepreneurship Program, which it still technically is, but I also created the Legal Business Design Hub there as well.
Got it. I like it. So, as you know, I applied for that job. I went through the whole thing. I traveled down to one of the worst airports I've ever been to, and I say this as someone from Kansas City, and which is a terrible airport if you've ever been there. And I tried to get that job. I am very glad that you have it. As I see the stuff that you're doing, I'm so glad that you are killing it. First of all, and second, I would be curled up in a ball, sad at bureaucracy because I'm just terrible at being an employee, and that's like working at a law school is like employee to this just super weird level. So I'm really glad to watch you suffer instead of me. No, but as I was going through that process, as I was telling you, a law student from the school was sent to me. One of the assistant deans sent the law student to me because the law student was thinking of buying a law firm in the local area. And it was going to be a thing with a 5-year buyout that the lawyer who had built this thing up, this older lawyer who wanted to retire, was going to sell the practice. And so this law student, this young law student, like fresh out of law school, was going to go sign on to a 5-year buyout, right? And so for the 5 years, the other lawyer was going to keep working and was going to take off a portion of the revenue of the law firm, a portion of the profit of the law firm, which is a whole thing, but was going to keep peeling off a portion of the profit of the law firm and then hand it off to this law student with the idea that the value of the relationships in the community would transfer to this new lawyer. That was the idea. And as I sat with this law student on the phone and talked through sort of a point by point, all right, what is the value that you're being asked to contribute? What is the value that you're getting in return? And what does this contribute to a future portfolio? In the end, I said, I think this is a terrible idea. And in the end, the law student said, I'm going to do it anyway, which
Hey,
is
that's the entrepreneurial spirit, right?
that is, let's call it that. I think that lawyers love the idea, and we all went to law school. If we're being honest, a lot of us went to law school with the idea that we're going to plug into something, right? That there's a known methodology, there's a known business model, that there's a lot of knowns, and we're going to be professionals and step into that. And we have found, starting our own firms, a lot of us, that that is not in fact true. There is not a knowable model. There is not a knowable approach, something that we can sell, even services. There's best practices, and we don't know what all those are. So what I want to do with you today, Josh, is go through what a good sellable business is, what you're looking for, either building or buying, and then what to do when you don't see that. Before we do anything context-wise to sort of add to what the heck you're thinking, why you're even paying attention to this problem right now.
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks for having me. And second of all, it's interesting that we share the connection of going for the same role at Richmond. And it's fascinating to me that law schools get a lot of, rightly so, a lot of crap in the market for not thinking new and thinking openly about things. And I will say, Richmond is a traditional law school, but they do have this. They do have this role, and they have the professional identity formation. And so there's lots of interesting things going on. And this whole topic that you and I are exploring is probably, I haven't made a decision, is probably going to be the legal business design topic in the spring semester for the Legal Business Design Challenge. So we're going to continue to peel back the layers on this. So this is just like the opening volley of that. So in the coming months, as I get smarter, because I'm massively ignorant right now, as we're going to discover on this topic, hopefully I'll get smarter. But the personal story, real quickly, if I may. My wife and I have been on a journey to either open our own business or acquire a small business for a few years now. Right before COVID, we got serious about it, and then COVID obviously happened, and you don't really do much in that. And through the course of, I mean, we looked at ice cream stands, we've looked at auto mechanic shops, we've looked at a whole bunch of things, right? Pizza places, and she's a holistic health coach, and maybe investing in that. And not too long ago, I was like, well, wait, I'm actually a licensed lawyer still. My whole career has been around redesigning legal services. It's kind of weird. I haven't thought about buying a law firm or starting my
Mm,
own law firm in a new vein, in a new
right.
model. And that's sort of where you catch me right now.
Yeah.
I'm in that mindset of like, well, this is kind of obvious. Let me go deeper in and really figure out if there's a there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what's got me into this right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm in a similar situation. I would love to pimp out my law degree. Like if anybody wants to practice law in Texas, but it's unauthorized practice unless my name is on the door, just call me. I mean, I will gladly peel off I just want my law degree to be paid for by a law firm. It feels unkind that now I have to, pay my freaking student debt with a business that I is doing much better than a law firm ever was. It's funny because I was literally talking to one of my best friends last week about he runs a water softener installation business in Texas, and I was like, you know what? We should be partners because I can turn this thing into an actual business. Right now, it's just your job, and I think that's actually helpful to think that way because you can be objective about a business that you know nothing about. So let's step back to a business, to the kind of decision making that should happen if you're looking at buying a law firm or, as we're going to frame it, building a law firm that is sellable. I will just say the mirror is true, right? Like if you're on the other side and you're looking at buying a law firm, these are a lot of things that should be true of a firm that you would buy as well. Know that they're probably not going to be, and we'll talk about that at the end, but these are the things to look out for. So let's start. First, with specialization. What is your? This is coming again from John Warrill's book Built to Sell, and the thing that he says is don't have a generalist company. If you run, in his case, he was talking marketing. It's sort of story. You see a lot of these books will kind of fake a narrative in it, and so that's what that book does. And so there's a guy who has a generalist marketing firm. What's your take on generalist firms, whether if you're going to purchase a firm or you're going to sell a firm, should it have a specialization versus, like, say, divorce versus we do small town law? What's your feeling on specialization for a sellable business?
I want a super niche. I believe in the niche. I believe in the super specialization. To take your example, I wouldn't want just a divorce firm. I would want a divorce firm that focuses on non-binary gender couples,
Mm,
right? Like, not saying politically or socially, like that's a very nichey thing, right? Or entrepreneur, two entrepreneur spouses or partners getting a divorce. How do you separate the businesses that they help build organically together? I don't want just a standard divorce firm. I'm not saying that's not a big business. I'm not saying that's a great market. I'm not saying I don't want to help those people. I just believe that competitive advantage, I know that competitive advantage is built in a very specific category. And if you define that category for your business, you get to win faster.
sure,
Right
but
now,
is your take on that? Is it about that makes it a more viable business? I'm looking at as as signal of that could be a longer term, more viable business. As in, that's advice for everybody, whether they're buying a firm or selling a firm or just building a firm, like specialized. Or are you saying if this is going to be part of a portfolio later, being a generalist is a negative because nobody wants to add a generalist to their portfolio. They want to add a complementary thing, or maybe both.
I well, I'm not going to say it depends, but your strategy should dictate. There is room for generalization, right? If you're going after a certain market share, and depending on you define market share, it could be demographic, it could be geographic, it could be psychographic. Like I don't want to get into the sort
Right.
of professorial zone there, but there is room for generalization. But it's your competition, your field of competition when you go general is much broader, right? So they're going with signal to noise. Your ability as the business owner to find the signal that's going to work, that's going to attract a client, keep a client, you know, get the client to refer you. I believe I've lived. It's harder to do that predictably and repetitively in a general market. That's why I like the niche.
Yeah, I think the conclusion that I came to in Lawyer Forward and in conversations that have happened after, I think if you're in a rural area, if you're in a small town, that town is a niche, right? Like that town
Yeah,
is a positioning. And so I think generalism works really well if you're making what is essentially a geographic play. Because
correct.
then it can be part of a portfolio. Then you can then say, okay, well, this is additive. If I'm in this small town and I want to purchase a firm in this small town or vice versa, then it becomes additive. I might be okay with that because the geography itself is the positioning. But to your point, I think if you're in a city, being a generalist just means you're not. What are you adding? You have this tiny segment on Google local search that is like a block that makes you geographically positioned. Otherwise, you have no positioning. So that's sort of where I land on that.
Yeah, I think there you're a victim of the market you're in when you're a generalist. Meaning, in legal, we know there's enough demand for legal that you can still survive as a generalist.
Sure.
You and I know many of now define survive, maybe not
Right.
thrive, but
Right.
you can survive just waiting for business to walk in the door. And unfortunately, that's what happens.
Well, yeah, and I want to talk about that because the next thing that Warillo talks about a lot that I think is the big problem with this kind of idea of buying and selling a firm is that the owner has to be not just replaceable, but eliminatable, if that makes any sense. Because a lot of times, I mean, obviously, that student who was graduating, he was literally trying to do sub one for one. He was trying to take out the current firm owner and replace himself. But usually, when you're talking about purchasing an existing business, the person who's purchasing doesn't become the CEO and COO. That just and oftentimes the purchasers are going into industries that they don't even understand. They don't even know that industry. They know how to run a business. Talk to me about if you're running a firm, the requirement that you're not trying to sell a job, right? Or if you're buying somebody's firm, you're not just purchasing a job. What are your thoughts on the replaceability or even eliminatability of the firm owner?
Yeah, so in the sort of in the technical arena, we'd call this the key person risk, right? So there's a key person to the business. No matter what business, generally there's probably a key person or a set of key people. In small business, it tends to be the founder. So let's bring that to law firm. It's the founding partner, right?
Yeah.
So are they the business or are they the just a partner in a law firm? And that is probably one of the most interesting areas to do your due diligence in. And if you talk to the brokers in this space, they will talk about that risk and they will talk about how the transition plan is much longer in the professional services place space than a plumbing, right?
Right.
Because of this, because the owner, the previous owner, the seller, let's use that, the seller is part of the product that's being sold to the market, right? So you have this substitution risk, right? I've got this lawyer who's been practicing for 30 years. We're going to substitute in a new owner who may or may not practice, and we'll go my preference and what I'm looking for because I don't want to necessarily practice all the time.
Right.
I want to be an operator. Um, how do we handle that substitution? This goes to that niche. I think this is where the niche, if you so there's a law firm for sale right now that is very nichey. I don't want to sort of disclose it right now, but it's in a very specific area of the economy, and a woman ran it and defined it. And so I'm looking at it going, okay, well, it's a niche, and she's done great things with the firm. I see lots of upside for the firm to grow and all that within the niche, and I'm thinking to myself, does the client care that they're getting services from her and her current lawyers, or do they care about the underlying value proposition of the business problems this firm's really good at solving? And if I can maintain and or strengthen how we solve those, can I mitigate the key person risk?
Yeah.
And that's part of my due diligence as I'm going into this. And I think that's going to be very niche or segment specific.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a transactional business, transactional type of firm, yes, relationships matter, but like buying a family law firm that's
Right.
known in the community, that has all the relationships with all the different providers and service providers, that might be harder. and it might be harder for someone like me who I've got no business practicing that, even if I just wanted to operate that firm. So trying to unravel that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to repeat a thing that I say all the time, and I said in the book, and maybe to the point that this is oversimplified, but for simplifying, a lot of it I think depends on whether you have a horizontal or vertical positioning. A vertical positioning means so it's a question of audience, like person type versus problem type. If you have horizontal positioning, it means you focus on a problem over many contexts. You don't have people, you have obsession with a problem, expertise, we'll call it. If you have vertical positioning, you're helping a person, whether we talked about the geographic positioning of a small firm, it's the people in that area, that type of person, or it's this industry, or to your point, this particular profile of a person, and you deal with all the problems, well, some, not literally all, you're not transporting nuclear waste for them, but wherever you define the bounds of your business, you've got multiple problems. I think by nature, the vertical positioning, meaning we work for a type of person, we're audience building around a type of person, then we're going to sell a bunch of different services that solve a bunch of different problems. I think that's easier to hand off because the key person is a process person. The key person is just somebody turning the wheel. Expertise is more complicated, but it doesn't mean that it can't be done. If your firm is built around expertise, your key person should never resist becoming a known expert while building the firm. The question is, how do you transfer the good of the personal brand over to the brand of the firm? And it can be done. But I think as you're doing the due diligence that you're talking about, you really got to evaluate this for, is this targeting an audience or is this targeting a specific expertise? And how does that change the way I think about the purchase?
Yes. And the complicating factor is now you're not doing due diligence on just the business, you're doing due diligence on the human.
Mm.
Right. And that requires a lot more interaction with that owner. You're trying to assess their personality, their ego, their willingness to get their terms, to just nod their head to get the price and terms they want. And are they going to fulfill the promise on the back end of helping you shepherd through that sort of zone of trust with their clientele? And there's no science to that at all. Now, yes, how you structure the deal, how you structure the earnout. You can have milestones, which is a very weird concept in law firm buying and selling. In small business and large business, earnouts are more obviously commonplace. But we have that human condition of the founding partner. They have had to have made the emotional decision that selling is not an economic transaction. It's an emotional transaction that they, and social, how they're being perceived in their community, that all comes to play. So you got to have a massively self-aware lawyer,
Yeah.
Who's willing and emotionally bought.
I don't know if that's our strength.
They're out there though. They are out there.
Yeah. So I'm getting questions that I want to address here in a minute, but to put a pin in that, it is common that the key person in professional firms is not as ready to sell as they think they are. So
100%.
Oftentimes when you go into this process, you really want to be the third or fourth buyer, right? Like you need people who have gone through some process because that's a lot of it. We're going to talk about valuation in a little bit. I had a question that asked about valuation. I will point out to this person's question, in Texas, at least when I was there, the ethics rule said, an ethics ruling, an ethics finding, so not the actual law, it's complicated, said that all you can sell when you sell a law firm is unexpired leases and equipment. That's all the value that you get to value based on it. So we'll talk about valuation, but it's shocking. But it does bring us to the idea, John Warillo talks about diversified income. And specifically, you don't want to have one big client. If you're going to sell a business or you're going to buy a business, you don't want to see one key client. You want to see a lot of ways that somebody makes money. And specifically, you want to see a systematized way that people make money. When you're looking at one of these firms and you're trying to value it or determine its viability as a future business, how are you thinking about the current numbers?
Yeah. So, yes, again, this is a personal preference. I want, a high volume of clients. I don't want institutional clients because I believe that it increases their key person risk, right? Because I want the business being the brand, not the individual being the brand, meaning if they're able to attract customers, clients
Hmm.
at a frequency that's currently sustaining the business, right? And I don't see on their books, a grouping of clients that are making up any disproportionate amount of revenue. That to me is a good sign, right? Because there's always a fresh pool of clients and customers who don't know this firm, right? So me as the new owner, that's opportunity for me to continue the brand and reach new customers who don't care who the previous owner was. And I can sort of go into that market, redefine the brand as I see fit based on the signals I'm getting from the market and going forward. Um, in my consulting work, I've worked with a number of small firms that live or die by one or two clients. In insurance defense, it's a classic
Right.
trap that a lot of law firm owners get into. I'm not going to touch those with a 10-foot pole. Um, just because even if those are long-standing relationships and you meet with them, as you should in due diligence, by the way, and they're saying, no, we're fine with you. We love, I just know that the way the legal market is evolving, um, there's just risk every day in terms of institutional buyers deciding they don't want to go with you anymore. And there's
Mm.
not much you can do about it. So I like the high volume, repetitive, fresh pool of customers.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with David Baker, which never works. For any of you who have not read the book The Business of Expertise, you really should. One of the things that he talks about is as your firm goes on, you actually get to fewer and fewer clients and bigger commitments from them. His ideal number is 10. You only want to have 10 clients, and that's an expert firm. And so to do that, he says every 3 years, you sort of re-niche, you sort of revisit your expertise, and you're going to actually narrow it. It's going to get more and more as you get older. On a level, I agree with that. I think if you're building an expert firm with horizontal positioning, I buy that. I buy that idea. But if you're building vertical positioning and scale is part of your model, you have to get to the point where you can get adjacent markets, where the thing that you've built to solve, right, because you're repeatable systems that solve problems for particular groups, that can be, you can hit adjacent markets. This is what Jeffrey Moore calls the bowling alley. You start to knock down the
Right.
adjacent pins, the pins that are nearby with your bowling ball. At first, it's not that way. You've got one ball, it's going down the lane, and you just do one thing and you really specialize. But you got to get to the point that you can get to those adjacent markets. So again, I think it's very model specific how diversified you want to see that. But the key question, and I want to get your take on this, is do you have a repeatable system for generating sales? For Peter Drucker's line, the job of any business is to create a customer. Do you have a
Yeah.
repeatable system for creating customers? Law firms don't have salespeople usually. How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, so this goes back just to sum up that I want to own the problem, not the person, meaning the client. I want to own the problem area in the market, not the people, right?
Right.
And in order to do that, you've got to consistently define the problem in a way that your client, your customer recognizes it, which is, to your point, lawyers are very challenged in doing that. We talk lawyer speak. We talk about the legal problem. We don't talk about the real life or business problem that our customers are bumping into all day. So the answer to your question is no, but that's the opportunity
Right.
in buying a law firm. If you have an established law firm with an established brand and established set of niche problem solvers, right, that aren't necessarily systematizing their client acquisition process, that's an area of growth for me. Like, so I want to see that because if they've been able to grow on some level and get to a position of selling this thing, and I look at the finances and we see the margins and everybody looks hunky dory. And then I say, well, how have you been acquiring your clients? And it's because, the founding partner attends the trade show, or, they're known in the community. Risk, yes, but that person can only cover so much ground. And I believe that by installing a system of client acquisition, of targeting, of being intentional about defining the brand and then communicating that into the market, that's the upside. To your point, that's where scale can start to happen. So I'm actually looking for the lack of that.
Mm. Yeah, we'll get to that. I think identifying the lack, the button that needs to be pushed, is really important when you're buying a business. To sort of summarize what Warillo talked about, he's saying have a standardized offer. something that you can operationally repeat. So stop being a firm with clients, start being a business with customers.
Yes.
You've on the supply side, you have to have repeatable systems that you can hand off to other people, maybe to technology. Just eliminate it, sort of down de-risking some of those things. Again, if you're building an expert firm, I might not agree with that, but it doesn't matter. The point is, have a standardized offer, have a system for acquisitions where you can put $1 in and you can get $2 back, sending them to that standardized offer so that you know you have consistent revenue, a way to pull the owner back so that the owner can be out of it, and enough revenue that you can prove not just that you have a job, but that you have a profitable business. You can run it through a profit first percentages system or something and show that revenue over time. But getting to reality, that's some nonsense, right? Like most law firms, you're not even close. Nobody's doing that. And
No, I
so
mean, listen, we might have some of the newer law firms trying to get there, but yeah, the vast majority of the market's not even work. We lost them a long time ago in this conversation.
right. So that might mean, hey, just stop looking to buy a law firm. Or it might mean if I could get whatever that good is and start pushing the button that they don't see, right? Or that they're not able to do. Usually, when a private equity company goes and buys like an agency, they do it because they say, man, if only these guys had money. If I could give them money, that's like the unlock. So, hey, I have money. I'm going to go put money into this. They've got the right key personnel. They've got the right systems. They've got the right customer acquisition. They just need money. That's the button to push. For you, that button might be Google local search. You've really figured out how to do Google local search. And if only you would get in and start pushing that button, this firm could take off. That's opportunity. Seeing that they don't do these things could be the huge opportunity. But then we get to the question of valuation, because the difference between a firm that you have to do all that button pushing and a firm that has proven itself should be like black and white, but to the selling attorney, it often isn't, right? They think, I've got $1 million firm, but $2 million firms are not created equal. These are not the same thing. So when you go into this and you know there are flaws, you know there are going to be things that don't work, you know you're in an environment where theoretically you can only sell unexpired leases and equipment, how do you think through valuation of a firm you want to buy or sell?
Yeah, so being a searcher in this space for law firms and other small businesses, you have to be wise. You've got to be wise when you interact with the current owner, the seller, right? Because the last thing you want to do is tell them that their baby's ugly. Okay, they're selling. They believe they've peaked at their success, and now they want to move on to the next thing or whatever. And you don't want to. My personal experience, you never want to try to psychoanalyze why the seller's selling. They're going to give you a reason.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say don't trust it. Just it's noise. It's okay, but there's probably other reasons. They're never going to tell you why. Um, but you have to be careful about saying, well, you haven't done this, you haven't done this. You have to say, well, you've done some really great things, especially in law firms, because that person's going to come along on the ride with you. In most cases, it's not going to be a transaction and they're just going to disappear with their check. We know that there's a transition, there's a handoff generally that's going to happen. That could be 6 months, it could be 3 years. They're going to be part of your ownership journey. You have to remember that when you're going into these negotiations, before negotiations, due diligence. They're going to be part of your team. So you have to be very careful. So the way that I've learned to have these conversations is to share with them to some degree your plans for growth and to bring them in on that dialogue, knowing full well that they're either going to poo-poo it because any idea worth having they would have had a long time ago. Okay, you just have to deal with that. You got to swallow the pill, or they're going to be reticent about following. But this is where the milestones, this is where terms come out versus price and valuation. And so we know valuation, it's price and terms. It's price and terms. It's not just price. And if there's one message that the audience I need them to hear is don't think of valuation as just price. It's price and terms. You're always balancing those two things. You want your price, you got to live with my terms, right? If I get my price, I'll give a little bit of my terms. So those terms are those earnouts, those milestones, the way you can monitor and regulate the behavior of the outgoing owner, right? So that's how I think about it. And this goes to the numbers on the books, right? And let's put bar rules aside, Texas and other, like, yes, there's definitely bar rules you have to consider in valuation. But there's also lots of ways to create a transaction that it honors bar rules, but still gets the owner what they want. Okay, I mean, we're all lawyers after all. We can make deals happen. Um, so we look at the numbers and we got to look at that person and say, okay, they're saying they want this, and I've got this much risk or uncertainty. How do I up my level of certainty, and what does that do on the price? And I would say, and I don't have tons of experience, but what I've been learning so far in buying and selling law firms, the interaction between the buyer and the seller, there's a higher volume and they're more intimate than, say, I'm buying your HVAC company.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, it's a longer process. It's more emotional work than just financial due diligence.
Yeah, usually when you see with services businesses, if you're buying a grocery store, you know not to consider revenue because cost of goods sold has to come out of there. If you pay $10, if you as a customer go pay $10 for a doll at a Walmart, Walmart does not consider, hey, I just made $10. I mean, obviously top line revenue they did, but if it cost them $8 to get that doll, then they made $2. And so to the early, there are a lot of $1 million firms that are not $1 million firms. And so usually with a services company, what you see, you see this with like marketing firms and stuff. They'll actually not calculate it as a multiple of revenue. They'll calculate it as a multiple of EBITDA, which I can't remember what that stands for, but it's basically like what the owner makes as owner, not just as employee, but as owner. Obviously with taxes and whatever, we sort of hide some of our income as owners. But what does the owner actually get out of this? They call it EBITDA, and usually there's a multiple of that, and that multiple increases as your firm's revenue increases. So if you've got $1 million firm, which I'm always fascinated the way people talk about $1 million firm. $1 million, unpopular opinion, $1 million for a services business and a regulated monopoly is not actually that hard to get to.
No, it's not.
It is. I mean, you can get to it. Maybe it takes you 5 years, but you can get to it. But that $1 million does not mean that you get to go sell your firm as $1 million for $1 million, right? They'll often consider the EBITDA, the what you pay yourself as an owner, and they'll do maybe 2x. If you've got a $5 million firm, that starts to send signal, oh, this is not just a job, right? This is a business, so maybe this is worth 3x. If you've got a $10 million firm, maybe this is worth 4x. The numbers change as private equity changes, and numbers are real low right now. But one that I saw recently that was interesting because of all that math was 0.5. 0.5 revenue, which I found so fascinating because it's like, why are you even talking about revenue? You clearly have a 0.5 multiple because you think revenue is a BS number, but that's what the law firm owner tends to pay attention to. All that said, when you're going into these negotiations with these owners who believe they have $1 million firm, how do you get them to think properly about multiples? Is your experience that most of these owners are aware of what market multiples are, or how are you approaching these people?
So no, they generally aren't. And this again, bringing in working with smaller and mid-sized and even large firms over the course of years in terms of helping their profitability. The term of art here is SDE, seller's discretionary earnings. Okay, so that's how much the owner pays themselves. Even that sounds too technical. So generally, we just say cash flow. How much cash flow are you keeping for yourself, lawyer? The valuation part is interesting, and it's not something they're savvy about. This is where brokers come. This is the service that business brokers. I can't imagine right now me going cold to a law firm and trying to acquire that law firm without a broker, because I don't want to do, and I don't think the buyer is in a position to do the emotional labor of discussing valuation. Right? That's where the broker, yes, you're going to pay a percentage probably of the deal value to a broker, but let them. They've had more of these conversations. From what I've gathered, the valuation conversation is most law firms are not sure how to value. So they don't come with a predetermined number. That's the good news.
Yeah.
That's the good news. Versus other businesses, like if you're a SaaS SaaS company right now, you're going to go for, 4x, 5x, or something like that.
Of
You're already
revenue.
going to
Yeah.
bias at how much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but most lawyers are like, I don't know how to value. How should I value? Should I value on cash? Should I value on revenue and all that? So that's the good news. I think the bad news is, to your point earlier, until they meet sellers and start discussing valuation, I don't think they know exactly how they value the firm. So the broker might have put $3 million on it on whatever basis, doesn't matter. And the seller may agree, yeah, that sounds good. And until the buyer comes along and says, I'll give you a 2.8 or 3 or something, I don't think they're going to be prepared emotionally to say yes right away. Right. I could see it now. They'd be like, well, I got 3. Maybe I should have asked for 3.2. Like, I just don't think there's certainty in the seller's mindset right now. I don't think they're overly fixated, at least my experience so far. So the good news is that, and the bad news is you've just got a lot more work to do to get them comfortable with the valuation.
Yeah, specifically, I mean, the question was about the seller that the questioner asked about seemed to be really focused on, hey, I've got a location right on the main strip and it's a really good, and then we get foot traffic. I had a similar thing when I moved to Rockport, Texas, and took over Steve Fisher's firm, that an older lawyer who was there found this thing called the internet. It's going to be big. And he had purchased like rockportattorney.com or something. And he tries to sell this. He finds out I'm there and he tries to sell me this like website for like $50,000 or whatever. And he says it gets a massive, I'm on the first page, it gets a massive bit of traffic. If you know anything about Rockport, Texas, it's tiny. I got to the first page of Rockport, Texas, Rockport Attorney, whatever the search was, in like 3 weeks with pretty basic internet-y things. I mean, it was sort of asinine. But as you're thinking about assets like that, assets that like location is ephemeral. That location may not end up being the good thing later. I mean, it's right across the street from the courthouse, cool. But that cookie shop over there might come open pretty soon because downtown areas are dying. So being right next to the courthouse doesn't really matter. Let's just go get the cookie shop, right? How do you think about these traffic assets and whether they're predictable into the future? Do you see value in things like location or domain name or things like that?
So I'm a digital first. I'm not an analog first type of business owner, right? So the physical domain of a street address and all that, there's people much smarter than that know how to buy those businesses, probably law firms based on that. I'm not necessarily in that market, right? So I'm looking, and this goes to what I'm looking for. I'm looking for ideally a virtual law firm, a digital first law firm that doesn't know any geographic bounds other than what the bar puts on me. Okay. So from that perspective, from that bias, I'm looking at, yes, I'm not going to get into SEO strategy, but I'm going to get into digital content and digital brand building, right? That is the real estate, if you will, that I want to own in my category. So when I think about their assets and valuation, if they've got a website that looks and feels like a law firm from the mid 1990s, and they may or may not have a video of 12-point font slides with a monotone voiceover explaining what the firm is, that to me is awesome because I know what I can do with that by building content, by updating the look, and by establishing that brand. And this is the weird thing, they think they are already a modern law firm if they're doing those types of things because the vast majority of law firms aren't even doing that.
Mm.
So it's this weird thing of where they think they're innovative and they want a valuation recognition for that. And I look at them and say, oh, my dear, you are still 20 years behind the curve. That's the valuation tension for me, right? It's like they want to be recognized for how advanced they are. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much more room to grow here. But
Sure.
again, they're not looking for crazy multiples. Like, again, let's be very clear. When you're looking at buying a law firm, their prices are not like out of the atmosphere. Like, they're just not. They're very well grounded, at least the ones that are coming through brokers. I haven't sat down and done a hard negotiation yet. So I don't know. I can't tell you how firmly fixated, price anchored they are to the valuation right now. I don't know. But to answer your question, I'm looking for digital real estate, digital assets, and those are generally immature, not established at all. And if they've done anything, it's very mediocre at best. And they might be overvaluing that.
I think to put a pin as before we close, I think to put a pin on the idea of valuation, if I'm hearing you correctly, know the principles, but leave it to the broker. I mean, the reality is that brokers are setting price whether we like it or not. Right? They get to determine the market. What I've often seen is one times revenue. Just as sort of the lazy, you know how lawyers do this thing where they'll go in a Facebook group and they'll say, "What do you guys charge per hour?" And everybody like says that. I think
Yeah.
it's usually that. It's the lazy sort of 1x. I've heard 1x revenue. Let's just do that. That's not very sophisticated. Maybe that's the right way to do it. If you're the buyer, you could go in and say, I'm going to pay 1x. You better see that that thing is actually worth more than 1x, right? Meaning you've got to have a more sort of advanced analysis, but know that the seller has probably gone into a Facebook group and been told 1x. But
Yes.
but but rely on the broker. I think as we close, stepping back to what we talked about initially, it's this idea of the portfolio, right? And in the modern, God, I read so many future workbooks and portfolio careers. It's just the way that it is now. You don't get a job now, and you work in that job forever, and that's your identity. The most people's work environment now is they got stuff, right? Like they might have a traditional job here, they might have a side gig here, they might have an Etsy store over there, they might be monetized. Thinking of your collection of businesses as a portfolio, maybe you shouldn't buy a law firm. Maybe you should buy a plumbing company. Maybe you should buy a lawn and garden store. Who knows? How do you think about if I'm either a lawyer selling and I want to therefore be additive to somebody else's portfolio, or I'm someone buying a law firm and therefore I'm trying to evaluate how does this contribute to my portfolio? How do you overlap sort of that thinking of seeing your work as a portfolio and this is like a bunch of pieces put together as opposed to I'm going to go buy a job?
It's a great question. And I've wrestled with that a lot. And it comes down to this: I'm not looking at it from a business portfolio. This is going to sound really cliche, but hopefully you're going to vibe with me here. It's a life portfolio.
Yeah,
So one of the biggest things that's been missing for me is my wife and I have never been connected in business. I do something that's completely different from what she does, and we're both 49 now, and we're getting ready to go on an adventure together in some way in business. And so to answer your question, it's really what gets us both excited.
right.
It's the life portfolio. We have younger kids, one rare disease, special needs, and we're always looking for an opportunity to share as a family the business, right? How might we get them involved? And that could be an ice cream shop. It could be a law firm to some degree. They're not, you know what I mean? But that's how we're really evaluating. So yeah, there's the buy the books. I'm doing the core valuation, but then it's like, okay, how does this fit into our life? Real quick, my wife, I shared with her this epiphany on maybe I should buy a law firm. Like this is kind of what I do. And she woke up the other morning and said, I'm getting really excited. Like we should build the world's healthiest law firm because she's a health coach and she knows that our profession is stymied by poor
Sure.
mental health, physical health. And it's like, wow, I don't know. We might do that. What does the world's healthiest law firm look like? Why would we build it? I don't know, but it'd be a fun journey for my wife and I to go on.
Yeah, I think we've spoiler alert to the people in the crowd. What we're doing with Lawyer Forward is very similar. We're trying to figure out essentially how to turn this into an events business that my wife runs because she's very good at in-person things, and for us to do something together, there's a whole story to tell about that. But I think to your point, you've got to figure out you, as I always say, to like new employees, I know I'm a pain in the ass in a whole lot of ways, but the one thing that's consistent about my business is me. So do not build a business around some idyllic version of you that is not real. You are the thing that is consistent. Your weird isms, your weird personality traits, all the weird stuff about you will continue to be weird. So know that that's there and buy accordingly. Josh, for people who want to learn more about what you're doing specifically with this buying and selling and connect with you there, but also what you're doing at Richmond and out in your portfolio career, what's the best way to connect with you?
Just on Twitter, it's at J Kubicki, JKUBICKI. That's the best way. You go into there, you'll find all my contacts.
Awesome. We will have that in wherever these show notes end up living over at Lawyer Forward. I will say pretty soon, maybe not today, but if you go over to lawyerforward.com, you can sign up for our newsletter. We're going to be really driving that as a way to connect with people and just pull all the stuff that we're doing, that we see friends like Josh doing, together in one place, so that you as a lawyer building your own portfolio career, that you feel like you know where to go for all these things. So just go over to lawyerforward.com and sign up for the newsletter there. And if you want to be a guest on one of these Lawyer Forward Lives on a Friday, just reach out to me. I'm Mike at lawyerforward.com, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Mike.